Hello and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to modify and manipulate the DOM by adding elements before and after certain elements. And this is a crucial skill required in jQuery. I would say 80% of the work involved in your day-to-day jQuery code is going to be focused on selection and traversal, both of which we've already covered, as well as DOM manipulation that we're going to look at now, and of course event handling. Now you've already seen how to do basic event handling stuff in the earlier lessons, but we're going to dig deeper into that in the next lesson. But for this lesson, I want to focus on DOM manipulation, a very important topic, so pay a little closer attention in this lesson. You can always Google or look up how to do a sliding animation or drag and drop behavior, but these fundamental components like selection and traversal, DOM manipulation and event handling, you want to have these down packed. And my primary objective for this course is to make sure you get plenty of hands-on practice in these key areas. Right, so we've already seen selection and traversal. Now let's take a look at how DOM manipulation works. We're going to use the same exact code as we did in the previous lesson, and we'll be practicing this right in the Chrome DevTools console like we did in the previous lecture. So let's get started with the append method. When you want to append something to the end of a list or a series of elements, we could first target using a selector. Let's target the UL with the ID math_subjects, and then I could just append another list element. Right, inside of these quotations, I could just put an li, and then in there let's say new course, and then close the li like that. Hit enter, and notice that the new course has appeared as the last list item in math subjects. Right, so this entire list is inside of math subjects. You can take a look at the elements tab and drill into the particular location where we have this first unordered list. Inside of math subjects, we've just added this new course. We appended it to the end of the list in math subjects. Now you can pass in a string like this directly into append, or you can pass in a variable that contains a jQuery object node. For example, I could define a variable called new course, and again this var keyword is important when you're defining a variable, and let's give it a jQuery object. We first need to put a $, and then inside of quotes we can create the DOM element. So let's create a list item. We'll call it trig for trigonometry. That's a subject in math, and hit enter, and this is our, you can just type in new course and notice that the li has been created. So this is a jQuery object. Now this object has been created, but it hasn't been added to the DOM yet. So let's append this to the math list. Instead of .append and then giving it a string, we can actually give it the variable directly, new course, and then hit enter, and notice that trig has been added to the bottom there. Just like we have append, we can do something called prepend, and prepend does exactly what it sounds like. It adds, instead of adding the element to the end of the list, it adds it to the beginning. So the first element inside of math subjects is going to be this new course jQuery object. So let's hit enter, and boom, notice that trig has been moved above. All right, I can do append, and notice where the trig goes. Keep an eye on the trig. I'm about to do append, and notice that it got moved to the bottom. So we're not creating a new object every time. This is just one object that we've already created called new course. Right, we've assigned it this document object, this element, and we can move it around and place it anywhere we want in the DOM using append or prepend. So let me clear the screen here. We also have something called after, and this is going to add the element after this element. So let's hit enter, and notice the trig is now added after mathematics. So this nested li, right, that's what is represented by this math subjects ID, right, this unordered list. Well, we're replacing this trig object after the math subjects unordered list. Similarly to after, we have something called before. So now this trig is going to be before the mathematics unordered list. So let's hit enter, and notice it's right here. It's before this math subjects unordered list. Now just to prove to you that it is in fact before this math subjects guy, I'm just going to do a quick border so you can see that this is math subjects, and this before is going to add it before this unordered list, after is going to add it after this unordered list. So let's run the after and notice that moves down here. Alright, so this should be pretty straightforward so far. We've got append, which adds to the end of the elements, prepend, which adds to the beginning of the elements, after adds after the entire element, and before adds before the entire element. So again, the way we defined this new course variable was we first declared the variable called new course, and then we gave it a jQuery DOM object by using the $sign with the quotations, and inside the quotations we mention the HTML markup. Trig was the value inside of the li. Okay, so this is creating a jQuery object, assigning it to new course. Instead of using the $sign and just getting a string, let's just give new course a value of string now. Hit enter. Now new course is no longer a jQuery object. It's just a string. So if I want to append this after this unordered list, like we are doing right here, let's just copy the same code. New course has been changed now to this string value. So I'm going to paste that, hit enter, and boom, notice that we have a repeat. Trig is being shown again. Okay, let me clear the screen. I'm going to run the same statement, and notice that trig is going to repeat again. Okay, and again, and again. Whereas when new course was an actual jQuery object, it wasn't repeating. So to further highlight this point, let me show you another example. I'm going to refresh the page to bring it back to default. Let's try to append to math subjects instead of the new course variable. Let's try to append the elements on this web page that are h3 tags. Now going back to the HTML, we should only have this sentence. This is the only h3 element on this entire page. Okay, let's append h3 tag that we have on the page. Now I'm going to target it first by using just a regular CSS selector and then closing the bracket at the end. So inside of the append method, we are passing an argument of a CSS selector, the h3. This is the jQuery object that is going to be retrieved from the page. It's going to target the h3 element, and we intend on appending that after math subject. So this is the guy. This is the h3 on the page. Now when I hit enter at this point, notice that that sentence moves down. So the one and only h3 tag that we had has moved down where I wanted to append it. Now instead of append, let's prepend it. Hit enter and notice it moves up all the way to the first slot in math subjects. Right? So we're moving this element around on the page. Let me change it to after, and notice that it moves after the entire mathematics unordered list. So this is a jQuery object, not a string of HTML, the actual jQuery object on the page that we are moving around. So that is why this $sign with the selector is important when you want to create new DOM elements. You should create them this way so that you don't have duplicates on the page. Now let's go back to append. If we append it to the end of this math subjects, it's going to go after calculus. Now if I do a dot text like that, so we're trying to extract the text from this h3. So the value that's going to be passed into the append is the actual text. Let's append that and notice that it's now just the text for h3. I can run this over and watch, it's going to duplicate. Right? It's duplicating over and over and over again. The reason is because we are getting the string representation of the object, not the object itself. So this is an important distinction you want to keep in mind when you're manipulating the DOM. I would recommend, let me clear the screen here and refresh the page. I would recommend that when you're creating your variables, let's go back to where I defined my first variable. I'm just pressing the up button where we can navigate to our previously written statements. So this is the variable that I had created before. I would recommend that when you are creating a variable that is supposed to contain a document object node, create a jQuery object using the $sign. And also for the variable, add a $sign before the name. Okay, that's a naming convention for variables that point to object nodes. This is a naming standard that's used in the industry, and I recommend that you follow it. This variable does not contain a string or a number, it contains a jQuery object of the DOM. If you have a variable that just contains a string, that's okay, you don't need the $sign before it. So let's hit enter. We have this variable declared. Let's say I ask you to append this trig list item to the end of the parent, of math subjects. So here are the elements. Let's navigate over into the math subjects ID. I want you to append this new variable that we created to the parent of this guy. So take this as an assignment, try this on your own, pause the video now, give it a shot, and then you can resume to watch my solution. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too bad. I wanted you to append that variable to the parent of math subjects, and the parent for math subjects is this li right here. So let's try that. In our selector, target the li ul math subjects, and then append the variable that we created, and that was $new course, but we can't just append it here. We need to append it to the parent of this guy. So we could do the dot parent method like that. All right, and this is going to go one level up to the parent of math subjects and append this new course there. So keep an eye on this UI and see where this gets placed. Let's hit enter, and notice that trig gets placed right after the parent of math subjects. And this is the math subjects UL. The parent of math subjects UL is this li called mathematics. So we are basically appending to this, and that's going to be added right here, trig. Alright, so hopefully this wasn't too bad. I just want to cover one more DOM manipulation method, and that is called remove. So what happens if we remove this particular variable? If we just do dot remove like that, what do you think is going to happen? As it is right now, this new course is sitting right here, this trig. So if I hit enter, boom, notice that that has disappeared. It's been removed from the DOM. Now you've seen the hide method. That is also, you can think of it as a manipulation method. You're manipulating the way the page looks, but you're not actually changing the actual structure of the page. The hide method basically just adds a style attribute and makes the display property to be none, but the DOM node is still there. With the remove method, we literally remove the DOM node completely from the entire DOM. If I do this, let's try to remove something else. Let's try to remove. And the cool thing about this console is we can revert everything by just refreshing the page. We're not actually changing the source code, right? We're just doing everything in memory here in the browser. So let's try to remove the science subjects. Right? That's the other ID that we have here, and make sure to leave a £sign before it because that's an ID. So I expect this entire thing to be eliminated from the DOM, and we're going to verify that by going to the Elements tab to make sure that that is in fact gone. So let's hit enter, and boom, notice that science subjects is gone. Now this science is li is still there because this is an li. Within it, inside of this li, we had the ul science subjects, and this is no longer there. Let's confirm that. Let's go to Elements, and let's go into math subjects. That's all still there. Then we have the li's, and then notice that the science is li. There's nothing inside of it. Okay, so it's not like some hidden property was added. It's literally been removed from the DOM. And that is our final method for this lesson, called remove. Again, just like the last lesson, take your time to practice using this console, move the elements around, create your own, modify and move existing ones until you feel comfortable. We covered a couple of methods. We covered the append method, the prepend method, the after method, and the before method. The append appends to the end of the list, prepend appends to the beginning of a list of elements, after places the element after the selected target, and before places the element before the selected target. When you want to add new DOM nodes, always have this $, just like you would with a CSS selector. The last thing we covered was the remove method, which is going to remove a particular element completely from the DOM. Alright, thanks for watching. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hey there, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson we're going to go deeper into events, and you're going to learn about the events lifecycle. But before that, I want you to try out an assignment. Make sure you have the proper project open. That's jQuery tutorial number 14, and this is the code for that. This is the HTML for the web page, and notice that we have a couple of divs here. We have this outer div, and then inside of there we have 3 divs, each representing a particular book. So let me show you the web page. What I would like you to do is write the jQuery code for this page to behave as I'm about to show you. When I click on the See Details button, it should show me the price of the particular book and the author, and then it also highlights the background yellow. If I click on this one, notice it does pretty much the same thing for all 3 of these. So going back at the HTML, notice that we have a data attribute. We have a data author and a data price. You can actually get the price and the author by executing the .data function. And as a parameter to the function, you pass in the particular key that you want the data from. So in the first case, the author is the key, so it gives us the value for whatever the author is. And then in this second example, we have price being the key. So it would get this $22 as the price for this first example. So for this assignment, you're going to need to use the .data function. Take a moment, pause the video now, and try this out on your own. I want the page to behave as I showed you here. Click on the button, the details are shown as well as the color is changed. Notice that to show the details, the button disappears. So you can go ahead, pause the video now, and I'll see you when we return. Hey there, welcome back. Hopefully you attempted this problem. This was a healthy problem for you to struggle with if you did get some struggling out of it. This offered an opportunity for you to think about how to replace an existing element and how to extract the data from the data attribute and how to show the details concatenated together. And you may have also used a little bit of traversing. So let's get started. I already have the document ready function in here. There are a couple of ways of doing this, and I'm going to follow a specific way first, and I'll show you how to improve that as we go along. So let's target all of the buttons on the page first. On the click event, we're going to execute the following function. Now, since we're talking about events, I just want to go over some terminology as we go along. This function that we've been using throughout the course for an event that takes place is referred to as an event handler. This is the event and this is the handler. We handle the event that takes place with this event handler function. So what happens inside of here? Well, let's first get the price for the particular button that was clicked. It could be this book, or this book. So let's get the price and then the author as well for the book that was clicked on. So let's declare a variable, we'll call it price, and then we can use this dot closest. And what is it that we're searching for that should be the closest? Well, we're searching for the book that is the closest to the button that was clicked. Okay, this represents the thing that the user is interacting with. In this case, it's a button. So once we've identified that particular book that was clicked, we could just get the data using this data method. And the key that we are interested in is the price. Okay, so this should get us this value from each one of these prices, depending on which book was clicked. The next thing, let's extract the author, which is going to be almost identical. Let's get the closest dot book dot data and then the author. And then finally, the details that will be printed to the screen when the button is clicked. Let's put that information into a variable as well. So I'll call that details, and let's create a DOM element with the p tag, and we'll first put the price of the book, and then we'll concatenate it using the plus sign. We're going to club the price, the data that's in this variable, we're going to club it together with this HTML content. So we use the plus sign to combine that data, to concatenate it. And then following that, we can have another string inside of which there's a break so that it moves to the next line, the author value. Okay, I'm going to make that bold. So what is the author going to be? Well, we have that in the author variable. And then finally, let's close off the bold text because the author's name is going to be bold. And we also need to close off the p tag. Okay, so we're combining the price and the author. It should say price and then the given price, and then on the next line, because we have this break tag, on the next line it should say the author and then the author's name, and it should be in bold because we are surrounding it with the bold tag. So what are we going to do now? Well, now what we could do is let's put this dot append. What is this again? Well, that's a button that was clicked, right? So we're appending after that button the details that we've captured. And then finally, what we're going to want to do is the closest book to the button, right? The book that was clicked on, we're going to set that background to be yellow. So that particular book div is colored yellow. And then finally, we don't want the button there anymore, so we can just remove the button using the this.remove. All right, with any luck, let's see if this works. I'm going to right click here, go to show in Finder, so that I could just double click here and open the web page. And this is our web page here. So let's see what happens when we click the details button. Notice that the background appears to be yellow, but the data, the details is gone. Click on this, the details are gone. Click on this, the details are gone. So let's refresh the page here and try to figure out what happened. I'm going to go back to the code and let's for now comment out this remove. We don't want this to be removing things, just to see where exactly do the details get appended, because they seem to disappear along with the button. So now let's refresh the page, click on see details, and notice that they sort of show up right here, kind of underneath the button, but part of it is still on the button. So this doesn't look like correct HTML. Let's dig into the actual markup. If you go to inspect, and notice that inside of the button, right? Inside of the button we have the C details, which was already there, and then we're appending this p tag with the price and the author and all of that. So that's going inside the button, and that's not what we want, because later on we delete this button, and this doesn't really look like a good presentation anyway. So what we want to do is, instead of append, we could use dot after. So let me change that. Instead of append right here, we're appending the details. Instead of appending them to the button, I'm just going to do dot after. That's one way. That's going to fix it. Let's refresh the page. Click on see details, and that does in fact show it after, and we want to remove the button finally. So if I uncomment it, that means that it will actually delete the button from the page. Click on it and notice the button is gone. So right now it's working as expected. Another way to do the same thing is, instead of doing dot after, and let's say I wanted to use append, I could actually do dot closest and search for the dot book class, right? And then do dot append details. So now it's going to append to whatever is in book. So this is the book div right here. It's going to append at the end of its child the p tag, you know, which is the details. So let's refresh the page now, and it should work exactly the same way. Let's click on see details, and boom, notice that it's working. Okay, so two different ways. You could use after or dot append, but you want to make sure where exactly you're appending it to. Append actually adds it as a child as the last element. So instead of appending it to the actual button, we are appending it to the actual div with the class book. So of course there's many ways of doing this. This is just one technique, but you should have made good progress in this assignment yourself. Now let's say if I wanted to add, let me refresh the page. We're about to move on to the details of how events work. Let's say I wanted to add some functionality that if a user clicks on this box or this box, anywhere outside of this button within this particular box, we want an alert to show up and notify the user that, hey, if you want to see the details, you click the button, don't click anywhere else. So if I click here, it's not showing me any of the details. I want that alert box to say to me that, hey, click the button to get the details. Okay, how would I implement that? Well, one way to do this is I could have another event take place. So when the user clicks on div.book. All right, so div.book. If they click on anything within this book div for any of these books, it's going to show the alert. So I could do .on and then click the event handler function, and then I could just alert to the user that, hey, click on the see details button to see the price of the book. All right, so now let's take a look at what happens. This is to show you an important point that we'll move on to in just a second. Now, if I click on anywhere outside of this particular box, if I click here, well, this is not going to show anything because we're targeting the click event inside of a book div. So if I click here, now it's going to say, hey, click on the see details button to see the price of the book. If I click here, click on the see details button to see the price of the book. Okay, so now let's click on the see details button. And then boom, notice it's coming up again. It's saying click on the see details button to see the price of the book. Well, I did click on the see details button. Now, even though it works, but there's a bug here. What's happening is, look at what I'm targeting. I'm targeting the div.book. So anything that's clicked within this div is going to trigger this event, and this event handler is going to be executed. So this div right here, I could click anywhere, it's going to give me the alert. But since this see details button is also within this div, it makes sense for that to also run. Now you might be wondering that when I click on the see details button, that should target a different set of code, right? If I click on the button, that should target this button. But the way event handling works is going to cause both of these to run. And it makes sense, right? Because this button is within this div. And when I'm saying that if anyone clicks anything in this div, that alert box should show up. So both events, clicking on the button as well as clicking inside of the div, are going to be executed. So let me bring up the slides to go over this behind the scenes. What exactly happens when an event on the page takes place? The event lifecycle. What's really going on? Take a look at this image. This, think of it as a typical web page, and notice that we have some list items inside of an unordered list that is yet inside of a div, and this div is inside of the body of an HTML document. I mean, think about it. If someone clicks on any of these list items inside, they're clicking on them, but they're also clicking on the unordered list. Since that unordered list belongs in that div, they're also clicking on that div, and that body is also being clicked on. So wouldn't it be fair for the unordered list to know that, hey, something inside of me was clicked, as well as the div to know that something inside of me was clicked, and the body of the HTML document to know that something inside of me was clicked? So that's how event propagation works. When a user clicks on one of these list items, the event lifecycle actually starts from the top, going inwards all the way to the particular list item, notifying on the way, notifying each of the different tags, the body, the div, the unordered list, that, hey, something inside of you was clicked. So it tells that to the body. Then it moves to the div and says something inside of you was clicked, and then it moves on to the UL and it tells something inside of you was clicked. Finally up to the point where it gets to the destination, the actual target that was clicked by the user. Let's say it was this last LI. There could be some event handler associated with this particular LI that would make it turn green and show some data, whatever the event handler function does. So once that's done executing, then that event, the click event, is going to propagate back out. Once the LI event handler has executed, it'll move to the UL and say something inside of you was clicked. Then it moves back to the div and tells the div that something inside of you was clicked. And then it moves back to the body and tells the body that something inside of you was clicked. So going inward towards the destination is referred to as the capturing phase of the event. And then going out back from the destination back out to the root, that's referred to as the bubbling phase. And in jQuery, elements can respond to events during the bubbling phase, okay? And we'll get into more detail in the next slide on how exactly that happens. In JavaScript, elements can respond to both capturing phase, going down into the destination as well as going back out. In jQuery, elements can only respond to the event in the bubbling phase. So let's move on to the next slide, and hopefully this will clear things up a bit more. So we have the document. This is a typical, HTML document structure. We have an HTML tag, and inside of there we got a body, and inside of that we have a div, and then we have further breakdown within the div. We have an unordered list with a particular list having another unordered list. So let's say someone clicked on this particular li right here. Well, what's going to happen is the click event is going to originate from the top. Right from the document, it's going to notify the HTML saying that something inside of you was clicked. That's going to go into the body and say something inside of you was clicked. So along the way, each one of these elements are being notified that something inside of them was clicked. And then it finally reaches the destination, which is this li, and some event handler function, let's say it colors the li green, for example. Once this event handling function completes, then what's going to happen is we're going to bubble back out. We're going to bubble back, meaning the event needs to bubble back out to where it originated from. And at this phase, other elements on the page can respond to that click event. Okay, so this is the bubbling phase. The event is going to go back, notify the UL, and then the li that was enclosing that UL is going to be notified. And let's say this particular div right here has some event handler that's going to respond if it receives a click event. Let's say it's going to show some images, for example. Well, when the event reaches to that particular div, it's going to execute this event handler and display all the hidden images, for example, on the page, or whatever, it could be anything in this event handler. But during the bubbling phase, the container elements could also respond to the click event, and then the event will further propagate back out to the origin. So this is the issue that we were seeing. When a click event took place in this button, the event started from the root of the document, went into the body, notified the body that an event has taken place, a click event. Then it went into this div, notified it that a click event took place, and then it went into this div, the specific div that was clicked, and notified that a click has taken place inside of it. And then it finally reaches this particular button and executes this event handling function, whatever this does. And then once that's done executing, then the event is going to bubble back out from where it came from. And at that stage, that's where we were seeing the problem. When it bubbles back to this particular div, we have logic here, div.book, that we're going to alert. So we need to figure out a way to prevent this event from bubbling back, because in jQuery, other elements up the pipeline can respond to that click event, and we need to prevent that. So the way to do that is we can use the stop propagate method. So inside of this button handler function, we can call stop propagate, but we can't just call it like this, right? We need to call this on something, and that's going to be the actual event that took place. And where is that? Well, we can actually just pass that as a parameter to this handler function, and then do event dot. So the event that is taking place, we can access that through this parameter, and then call the stop propagate. It's actually propagation. Let me respell that, propagation. This is the function. So this is just a variable. It could be event, it could be EVT, it could be E, whatever it is. We just want to make sure that we use the same variable to refer to the particular event, okay? So what this is going to do, what this line is going to do, is prevent the event from bubbling back. It's just going to stop the propagation right here. And so this event is going to stop. It's never going to reach to this point where we have another listener right here. So div.book will never receive that the click event has taken place if someone clicked on the button. And so this method is not going to be executed. So with that fix, let me refresh the page here. And now if we click anywhere outside of that button, we should see the, it says click the see details button. So it's working so far as expected. Now, when I click the see details button, I don't want to see that alert box again. And it looks like it's still it looks like it's still showing the alert box. So we need to fix something here. Let's see what I did wrong. Oh, I spelled propagation wrong. It's it's propagation. Propagation. Okay. So now this should be working as expected. So click here. It shows the alert box. When I click the button, I don't want to see the alert box. And boom, there you go. It's working as expected. When I click anywhere outside of this div, it's still going to show me that. So it's working as expected, and that's because of this stop propagation method. Make sure you get the spelling right. This function is going to prevent the event from bubbling back to the container elements. All right, so some deep theory there, stuff that you need to know about in a JavaScript course. We covered quite a bit in this particular course regarding events, and I think it's an important topic, so you really want to understand it. One difference between jQuery and JavaScript: jQuery, you can respond to events like this during the bubble phase, when the event is propagating outward from the button out to the div and out to the other div. That's the only phase in which these tags would be able to know that a click event has happened in jQuery. But in JavaScript, as the event travels down, these elements would have a chance to respond to that click event going downwards as well, the capturing phase. So a big difference with the way jQuery handles this and the way JavaScript handles this. Again, JavaScript can respond to the event during the capturing phase as well as the bubbling phase, whereas for jQuery, it only supports responding to the event during the bubbling phase. And the reason why the difference exists is because jQuery is meant to be browser independent, and certain browsers work differently. For example, IE8, I believe, and Opera, those browsers do not work the same way with bubbling and capturing of events. So jQuery is a library that's supposed to make web development easier, so they are only supporting handling of events during the bubble phase to support cross-browser compatibility. Alright, so a lot of information, but this is critical information that you must know in an interview. If you missed any of this, I would recommend that you review this lecture up to this point to fully understand how events happen. Now, this ended up being a pretty long lesson, but I felt the need to repeat things a couple of times so that you're able to retain the information. That's why it took a little longer. But there is one more topic that I'd like to discuss really quick before ending this lesson, and that is event delegation. So to illustrate that example, I'm going to add some HTML to this page. I've just added a div outside of this top books to read. This is a div that's going to contain already books completed, okay? Books that have already been read. And inside of here, we have one book that we were able to complete, okay? Not a very avid reader, but we have one book completed. It has a few different attributes, data attributes associated with it. So the purchased date, this is different than the data attributes that we have up here. It has an author, but it does also have a my rating. It does not have the price. So with the way our jQuery code is written at this point, would that div respond? Let's refresh the page. Well, actually, it's already been refreshed. When I click on this button, it shows the price and it shows the author. But what do you think is going to happen when I click on this button? Let's click on it and notice that it shows price data attribute as undefined, and that's because it doesn't have a price. The author is being shown because it does have an author. So this is actually going to the event handler of this function. So one way to fix that so that only these buttons have the logic of getting the price and the author and so on, and the button that belongs here is supposed to show the purchased date and the rating for the book or whatever. This should show different details. So one way to fix that is we can use event delegation, and we can say that only books that are within this div should respond when the button is clicked. So I could copy this, and just instead of the button here, I could put the ID books div and then dot book. So whenever inside of this there is a click event for, I'm about to add another parameter here, button, only then is it going to execute the instructions in this event handler. Alright, so this is a different way of organizing our click handler. The event handler is only going to run when a button click has happened inside of this category. Okay, so this is another way of doing event handling. We give the target, and within this target, if a button is clicked, then only run this. Okay, and this is going to solve that problem. We don't want this button showing any details or yellow because we haven't coded for it and it's not the correct button, so we want it to show the alert box. So those changes fixes that problem. It shows the dialog box because this e.stopPropagation never executed. Since this thing never executed, the bubbling of the event went up, and that's why this actually ran. So let's create another event handler like this for this area. So I'm just going to sort of copy most of this. I'm going to paste it down here, and instead of books div, I'm going to take this completed this books completed ID, and as long as the button that was clicked is inside of here, this event is going to execute. So similar to what we're doing up here, I'm just going to copy the code. Instead of the price, I'm going to take purchased, and the author is going to stay the same, and I'm just going to copy that for the, what was the other attribute here? My rating. I'm going to paste that in here. So we'll call this rating. So it's going to be very similar to what we had up here, and the first one is going to be purchased date, and of course this should be named date, and I'll change this to date. The author can remain the way it is, and I'm just going to borrow this line break and paste it after here so that we can move on to the next line and we can have the rating of the book, and I'll just call it rating. So almost identical to the stuff up there. Now we want to append the details right after the button. So I'm going to do the same thing like that. I'm going to color the background yellow as well as remove the button, and then of course we don't want this to bubble up and execute this alert. So we're going to do the event propagation, and we can of course only run stop propagation if we have declared the variable in the parameter of this function, of this event handler. And just to prove to you that it doesn't have to be E, I can name it whatever variable I want, and this should work as expected. So let's refresh the page. If you click here, whoops, something is not right. What do you think that could be? Well, one hint is this part never got run, so that must mean that we never got into the body of this method. So something might be the issue with the way we are selecting here, and I believe that we have the same problem up here. And of course the issue is that we have the wrong selector. This book, this class does not belong to this particular div. It belongs to this inner div. So we need to have descendant selector like this, the direct descendant selector in both of these guys. And now I believe it should work. So let's refresh the page, click on this button, and notice that it's working. We have the purchase date showing correctly. We have the author, and the rating is shown as undefined. So did I mess something up with the rating? And the issue is that it needs to be lowercase. For it doesn't matter what is named after the data tag or data attribute name. After the dash, whatever's here should be all lowercase. And that was the problem that we had here. This, instead of capital, it should be lowercase r. So now let's refresh the page and click, and notice that it is in fact working. It's showing 5-star. And then these guys are working in their own respective manner. Alright, so this was a pretty lengthy video with a lot of detail. Hopefully you should be prepared for taking in all of this information, and hopefully some of this stuff was a review, and a lot of it was actually new content, such as the stop propagation event, the bubbling and capturing phases of the life cycle of events. And then I wanted to test you on your selector logic one more time before ending this lesson. This is a descendant selector. And then we also talked about event delegation. So instead of targeting the button directly, we're targeting this area, and we're saying that if a button within this element was clicked, only then this will run. So we're specifying after the click parameter. And then To the function, we can pass in any parameter name, and that will take place of the event. This gives us a handle on getting information about the event, and you can name it whatever you want. In this example, I used event. On the example above, I used E. So that about wraps up this lesson. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Hey there, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to go over Ajax. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the technology, how it works, and how web pages respond differently depending on when they have Ajax implemented and when they don't. By the end of this lesson, you should have a firm understanding of why this technology is so important. And in the next lesson, we're going to dive into the details of how to implement Ajax in jQuery. Ajax is a methodology used for modern web development that allows sending data to the server or receiving data from the server all in the background. And since the sending and receiving of data is being done in the background, this doesn't interfere much at all with the web page's default loading mechanism. Now, the default loading mechanism for a web page is actually the entire page refreshing in your browser on every request that you make. Now, you might recall some old websites back in the day when you were to click on a particular link to show specific data, the entire web page would refresh. And that's typically how the HTTP request model works. But with Ajax, most of the web page can still remain intact, while only the relevant parts of the page are loaded. So to better understand what Ajax is, let's go over an example of a popular web page. It's been around for a while, and it doesn't entirely depend on Ajax. So head over to this website called Norvig, norvig.com/21-days.html. This is a great article that I recommend everyone to read, but it will also help us highlight an important point. So this is that website, nothing super fancy, but you'll notice that it has some options here. You can translate it in multiple different languages. Now, if I were to click this Bulgarian language translation link, let's click here and notice that the entire page, it basically took us to a completely new page. Rather than changing the text here, translating it on the fly, it basically took us to a new web page. Contrary to this, let's look at Amazon. And I have the word office chair typed here, and it brought up the results for office chairs. Now, if I click on one of these subcategories, let's look at office task chairs. If I click here, notice that only this portion, you saw that loading circular thing? That showed that only this portion was loading, whereas the rest of the page was still intact. Now, if I, instead of sort by relevance, I go to featured, notice that it's loading again. Only this part of the page, not the top piece. So this is Ajax in action. Most of the website is still intact. Only the portion that we are interested in and that we are clicking to find more information about, only that portion is the one that's being loaded. The rest of the page is still entirely intact. The older website that we visited before Amazon, that website was not using Ajax, so it was falling back on the default functionality of the HTTP request response. The default functionality refreshes the entire page rather than load things in the page dynamically. Amazon and most of the modern websites nowadays use the Ajax request response model. And we're going to go into the details of the differences between these two models. But that's the idea. That's what makes Ajax so appealing, is the rest of the page can remain intact, and only the portion that we are interested in or we're drilling down into, only that portion is the thing that's going to load and refresh, not the entire page. And this sort of gives a desktop application feel, right? Like if you used Microsoft Excel or Word or any desktop application, when you click on a particular element on that application, the whole application doesn't refresh. So this Ajax really gives the desktop application feel, and it's a much more pleasant experience online. And that is why most of the websites out there, most of the modern websites out there, use Ajax. So on Wikipedia, there's a good picture that I'd like to go over really quick. Notice it makes a comparison between the conventional model of web application and the Ajax model of a web application. The conventional model is, you're in your browser, you go to a particular website, it loads a user interface, and after that, if you make a request, such as click a link or click a navigation bar item, it goes to the web server, and the response, it sends you the entire HTML document again with the CSS, and all of the different data elements back to the browser, and the browser would have to do all the work of basically loading it back into the DOM so that you can see it. So the entire page is refreshing. In this example, on the right, this is an AJAX model of a web application. When a user on a web page using the browser, they make a particular request. That request goes to the web server, and the web server responds with only the relevant data, the XML or the specific HTML portion, or just the JavaScript data that we'll look at in a little bit. Just the specific data is being sent back to the browser. And the AJAX engine, the JavaScript, loads only the relevant portions to present in the user interface, rather than loading the entire user interface like it was doing on the more conventional model. So JavaScript supports this AJAX functionality, and of course jQuery wasn't going to sit on that. So jQuery also has some methods you can use to load data dynamically in the web page using AJAX. Let's go back here to the slides for a minute. I want to go over the example of a traditional request versus an AJAX request. So let's first look at the traditional request response model. If you're using your browser such as Chrome or Microsoft Internet Explorer or Firefox, and you go to a particular URL of a web page, the web page is loaded in your browser. Now if you click a particular link or try to load data on that web page, a request is going to be made to the web server, and the web server is going to respond back with the entire web page again, right? This is the traditional model. This is the way things behave on the web by default when AJAX is not being used. Because the entire web page is sent back, that's why you see the page refresh on older websites. So the user interface would have to be reloaded every time. Now let's say you got that response back, your browser loaded that page up, and you want to click on something else on that page, and you want to see some data. Well, another request is going to be made to the web server, and the web server is going to respond with all that HTML, CSS, and script, and basically return us a new page, and the browser will be tasked with the requirement to reload the entire page again. Alright, so the browser is definitely working harder. With the AJAX request flow, when you click on a particular link of a web page to show some data or something, a request is made, and then the web server sends the data back, the response, and is applied to that same web page. Alright, so the web page is still entirely intact. Only the portion of the data that was requested is returned and applied to the user interface of the web page. Right? And let's say the user clicks on some other link. The request is sent to the web server, and this web server responds with the data, and that data is loaded within that same web page. Rather than sending back an entire set of HTML and CSS, it just sends the relevant data that can be applied within the existing web page structure. So to implement this AJAX functionality, there are methods within JavaScript as well as, of course, jQuery. And jQuery makes this very, very easy to implement this dynamic behavior on the web page. Now you might be wondering, how is there this difference between the way AJAX request response flow works and the traditional request response flow work? Well, the main difference is in the kind of a request that is sent from your browser to the particular web server. So in the standard HTTP request model, when you navigate to a website and an HTTP request is sent, you click on the page, load some data. Basically, HTTP request is sent in the standard HTTP model, and the web server responds with a new web page. Okay, that your browser basically loads the page in the DOM. Well, in the AJAX request model, a special kind of request is sent. It's not an HTTP request exactly. It's an XML HTTP request, and the browser is able to send these kinds of requests if the JavaScript engine supports it. And nowadays, all modern browsers support the AJAX engine, and these kinds of requests can be sent to the web servers. And the response from the web server is not going to be a new page. It's just going to be the data only. The data that is of interest is going to be returned. Now this term data is a vague term. It could mean anything. What kind of data exactly could it be? Well, there are generally three types. It could be an XML data, which is very similar to, the tags that you've been seeing in the course, the HTML tags. Well, you can have your own XML structure, and that could be sent as data back to the browser from the web server. Or you could just plain old request a piece of HTML. Maybe it could just be a specific table with some data. You can request that from the web server. Or you can request something called JSON. Now XML and HTML, you should already know what those are. We've been using HTML throughout the course, and XML is a variation of HTML, except you can create your own tags. But the structure, the document structure, is the same. This JSON is a different kind of structure, and this stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's actually the simplest out of all these other data structures. It's simpler to read, in my opinion, than HTML. It's simpler to read than XML. And it looks like this. Notice that it's pretty readable. The different elements have names, and the actual data is surrounded by these curly braces. So the entire set of data is surrounded by these outer curly braces, and then inside we have a name, and that could be of a person. The first and last is an attribute inside of name, and the value is Imtiaz Ahmad, my first and last name. And then outside of name we have gender, then we have the verified, it could mean anything, my age, and then as well as the owns field. I can own TV, I have a computer, a house, a six-pack is something that I wish I had, so I just added that there, but I don't. A car, skates, and snowboard. So notice this is a straightforward structure. It takes a little getting used to in terms of visualizing it and understanding it, but when you read something like this, it's pretty intuitive to understand, especially if it's formatted this way. This is called a JSON structure, JavaScript Object Notation. That's what JSON stands for. So in AJAX, the XML HTTP request object could contain data such as JSON. It could contain XML as well as HTML. And these are the three most common data types that are sent back and forth from the server to the browser. And this all happens in JavaScript. JavaScript is the language that implements the AJAX functionality. And again, AJAX is sending data back and forth from the server to the browser in the background. Okay, everything happens in the background in AJAX. Parts of the page can be loaded as you interact with them if AJAX is implemented. And the data, such as this, could be shown on the page when a user requests it, right? This data in this format can be sent from the server over to the browser. But the entire page wouldn't have to refresh to show it, only the particular portion. Let's say if there was a table that required my name and my gender and my age and so on to be populated, it would be done so dynamically. The entire page wouldn't have to refresh. The data would just appear because this JSON would be sent from the server to the web page, to the browser. And let's say that there was a form on the web page and I had to fill that form out with my name, my phone number, my address, or all these details, whatever it is. Well, when that form is submitted, this same kind of structure could be sent to the server so that the server could maybe save it into the database or make additional modifications and then send that back to the browser to display the information in a different way. But basically this is the information exchange format. It could either be JSON, HTML, or XML. JSON nowadays happens to be the most popular way of exchanging information. So this lesson was sort of an overview of the AJAX technology and what it is and how it can be used in a website. In the next lesson, we're going to get into the details of how to implement this using jQuery. So stay tuned. I'll see you soon.